The Budget Office of the Federation has defended the repeal and reenactment of Nigeria's 2024 and 2025 Appropriation Acts, dismissing claims of constitutional breaches and fiscal illegality. BOF said the Constitution allows the National Assembly, with presidential assent, to amend, repeal, or reenact budgets when fiscal realities demand it. It stressed that such actions reinforce rather than weaken legislative oversight of public funds. Addressing transparency concerns, BOF affirmed its obligation under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, noting that delays in document release are to ensure accuracy and legislative authentication. The agency pledged improved access to budget documents and stronger citizen-friendly fiscal communication. And to give us more perspective on this is Samuel A. Comey, Lead Research and Insights, Nuremberger. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Now, does Nigeria's constitution explicitly allow the repeal and reenactment of an Appropriation Act, or is this power being inferred from legislative practice?
Yeah, so again, if you look at the Nigerian Constitution, I think we have quite an established framework, right, that allows, and it's quite straightforward. The president presents the budget estimate, the National Assembly, of course, authorizes that expenditure, and then that's through the Appropriation Act, and then the executive implements this. In essence, the Constitution does not really prohibit the National Assembly, as the case may be, from repealing or reenacting this Appropriation Act. So again, we would say that you can infer from that both the National Assembly can, as the time permits, based on the realistic or how realistic some of those assumptions that guided the initial budgets, how realistic they are in terms of changes in the economy and whatnot, they can, as the case may be, repeal or reenact those budget numbers. And I don't think that's far-fetched. We've seen that also played both in the US. We have the budget rescission in the US. We have the UK also having supplementary budgets. I just feel that one of the major problems that Nigerians have had is the lack of transparency in the process, and the fact that we tend to do this after the fact and not before those decisions are being made. So yeah, if we're going by constitution, by the Constitution, yes, we can infer that they do have the right to be able to again repeal and then come up with supplementary budgets, as the case may be.
Okay, so they're well within their rights, but are there particular conditions where this is allowed or expected or necessitated? I mean, under what fiscal macroeconomic conditions should a repeal or reenactment of a national budget be considered necessary so we don't abuse that right?
So generally, right, situations where you find a repeal or an enactment happens when you have shortfalls in terms of revenue. And I think we've pretty much faced that over the last 11 to 12 years. We see that 2025 budget, for example, we had quite a number of assumptions that were unrealistic, things around crude oil prices being around $75 a barrel. For most part of the year, it was around the region of 63 to 65. Crude oil production also, we did not meet up again with our own quota in terms of our budget assumptions. So of course, those combination of that had significant impact on revenue. So we have situations like that. Also situations where you have overlapping budget cycles. And I think we've seen that in the last 2 years also. The budget for 2024 ran into 2025, and I think it's probably just ended last month. The one of 2025 we've also sent an approval to the National Assembly by the president to also extend that timeline also towards the end of Q1 2026. And when you have situations like these are some of the things that would help that, of course, drive these changes as we have. So if you have major shocks, economic downturns, things like the COVID-19 that we had in 2019, 2020, we saw that also a number of countries around the world also had to change their budget numbers as a result of that. So those are pretty much major shocks that could pretty much infer or suggest that the National Assembly has to probably repeal or reenact some of these budgets. In my own opinion, I don't think we have so much of shocks, except for the fact that revenue shortfalls, which we have been dealing with over a number of years, and then the fact that we have overlapping budget cycle. Also, again, that is really not new again. So yeah, those are the conditions that were warranted.
Yeah, and we continue to find ourselves in those conditions with unrealistic assumptions. This budget, they have said they consider it realistic, a budget of realism. If I quote the leader of the House, he did say it's a budget of realism or something along those lines. But do you also see us looking at the assumptions, looking at what is happening globally with oil and predictions that we could get to $50 a barrel? What are your thoughts on us finding ourselves in that particular situation again? And the goal to bring or close the budgets, the ones we're overlapping several budgets, and we hope to close those books by the end of March. How realistic is that?
Again, at this point, really can't say, because one of the issues that we also have is that we lack information. We don't have data to be able to speak. Before now, the Minister of Finance, the previous Minister of Finance under Buhari's regime, you would always have budget implementation reports every quarter that helps you to understand what has been done. And that way you are able to measure power to power what has been done against the target or against the budget. But what we've seen in recent time is that you don't have that information, so you definitely cannot even speak from a factual point of view as to what budget numbers are doing at a point in time. To speak about how realistic, I think from looking at the assumptions that we have in the medium-term expenditure framework, right, compared to the budgets that we had last year, I think it was a little bit more conservative and close to reality compared to what we used to have. Like I said, we had $75 a barrel last year, far from that. This year it was around, I think it's currently around $63 or $65 a barrel as per that MTF. Of course, we've not seen what the budget numbers exactly look like to see what the eventual bill is going to look like. But I'd say that it looks close to reality, and that might be a plus for us, especially going into a year where we are also coming up with a tax reform, and that is also primed to pretty much revolutionize how the fiscal environment is going to look going forward. So it will be interesting to see how 2026 pans out. But I would say it's a better position compared to the assumptions that we had in 2025. Of course, we look at things around the inflation numbers. Right now, inflation is already less than 15%. So again, those assumptions you could very well see it around the region of 10 to 15% at the end of the year. GDP growth around those 4% plus. Yeah, very, very possible, because at this point, the estimate is that Q4 2025 could have seen growth around the region of 4%. So yes, those are very much realistic. But again, other areas, especially around the fiscal numbers, crude oil prices, we don't really have power over that. There's an issue around Venezuela and US also impacting crude oil prices. We really don't have power over that. But what we have power over is the quantity we can produce. So how well can the government be able to improve local production to be able to meet our quotas and ensure that whichever happens in terms of prices, we are still not far off from our revenue expectations.
Interesting. And after this break, we'll get into how this repeal or re-enactment could affect investor confidence and fiscal predictability. Stay tuned. You're still watching Business Edge. The Budget Office is defending its repeal and reenactment of Nigeria's budget, and joining us to break that down is Samuel Akomi. Obviously, you have expressed that it's well within their rights to do so, and you've led us into the conditions in which, that would trigger them to consider repeal or reenactment. Let's now take a look at the impact that has on onlookers, investors, and fiscal predictability.
Yeah, I think those are very gray areas that has been major concerns, right? And I think I mentioned the fact that Nigerians, investors generally want to be able to assess the country also based on budget numbers. And those budget numbers, of course, and both budget numbers and implementation help them to also make plans going into the year. What you find now is a number of people are still in a limbo going into 2026 because they don't understand what level has been done for the 2024 and 2025 budget, for example, and what might also happen in 2026. So a need for transparency and accountability has been a major setback. And you see that in the last few weeks, we've seen a number of bodies come up to write petitions against the National Assembly to say that this repeal and reenactment of the budget is unlawful because it's not transparent. We don't have ideal stakeholder engagement in those processes. And what will happen in a case where a number of people don't have that level of trust is that you have that form of political appetite where people don't or particular party, right? They just get disinterested in the process. And if that is not being curtailed, again, what would happen is that an executive in the executive arm of government, for example, could take advantage of that and just spend out of budget allocations, and you start seeing monies being moving around. What we see is clear. We see borrowings clear, external borrowings, domestic borrowings. Those are clear. We see them in our bond issuances, our Euro bond issuances, IMF and World Banks and whatnot. But what the money is used for is not clear. And I think that's an area where the government really needs to start tightening in a bit to ensure that trust is being built in the country, both for local and foreign investors.
Accountability, I think that's the key word there. And I think that brings us to the question on having safeguards. Are there any safeguards that exist that will ensure that repeal or reenactments are not used arbitrarily? What can be done in that regard to ensure that they are used when necessary and it's not used to enable fiscal excesses?
Yeah, so I think first, as far as the Constitution is concerned, of course, the National Assembly has that oversight to be able to watch that the executive do not just of course, like you said, fiscal excesses and just spend at will or on a whim, right? But again, I think we need, beyond just the National Assembly, you also need other bodies to be able to act as check and balances, which is fine because that's what we have right now. We have people who can call the National Assembly to order to ensure that what is meant to be done is done. But as far as the Constitution is concerned, and when it comes to Fiscal Responsibility Act, the National Assembly has that primary role of acting as a check on the executive when it comes to budget, supplementary budget allocation and spending. But it is very well fine for us to have other bodies, other independent bodies away from the government that can also act as checks and ask these questions when needed. Right now, a number of us are asking questions because we really do not know what the numbers look like at this point in time, and that could also deter sentiments around outlook for the year.
And I think it brings us back to what you pointed out earlier, the importance of a budget implementation report to track how money is being spent. That isn't something that we have been, or correct me if I'm wrong, we have been getting for a while now. What can we do to press them to give us or release or come up with some sort of report that can enable us track spending and hold them to some level of accountability?
Okay, so in the defense of the Budget Office and Ministry of Finance and whatnot, what they have come up over time is to say that the harmonization of data, they are always prioritizing, they're prioritizing integrity of the data as against how swift data is available. And I think one of the problem is, which has been some of the things I've mentioned over time, is that we need to have our data in one source of truth. If you have your data in one source of truth, where be it the Ministry of Finance, be it the Budget Office, and a host of many other bodies, even the CBN or the NBS requires data, they get it from that one source of truth. That way, you are not reinventing wheels. So the Budget Office is not preparing a different document from the Ministry of Finance. And I think that's the major problem from a fiscal point of view. If you have one source of truth, then there's no need to harmonize because that data is coming from one source. For us as individuals and public stakeholders who want accountability, I think what we just need to do is just keep making the noise, keep engaging and having conversations as to why we need this information. I remember a couple of years when the CBN was not releasing Purchasing Managers Index report then, and that was quite important for us to be able to make inference around what is happening in the economy at a point in time, rather than wait 2 or 3 months later to get GDP data. And we made conversations, we had those conversations, we made noise around it, and after a while the CBN restarted it and continue to report that. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to do going forward. Keep having those engagement, have those conversations, so that the government knows that the Nigerians will not just sit hands on hands waiting and following whatever they do without asking questions. So again, this conversation is quite important, but the government on their part really need to start identifying why they are not able to swiftly release this data, because they're after integrity. And in order to solve integrity problem, you need to have one source of truth. And it's not just based on fiscal numbers alone. It even goes beyond that into social demographic information that even helps them to come up with budgets and allocations around the country. Right now, we don't have a verifiable data around population, for example, of Nigeria. Right, and that's an issue. Again, if you have one source of truth that is updated regularly, timely, I think would be able to solve a huge part of these problems that we have so far.
Yeah, and I think how does one plan without data? I think those are very big questions. Hopefully, we have them answered soon enough, and we're back on track. Even though it is a pre-election year. But we'll be following all this and more. Now, how does BOF balance transparency with the need to avoid releasing unharmonized or conflicting unharmonized and conflicting fiscal documents?
Again, I think I mentioned that they mentioned the issue around how they're prioritizing integrity and how they want there to be consistency around data. And I agree with them that it's quite important, but timeliness is also important. You cannot be releasing data of 3 years, 4 years. You cannot be releasing data after 3, 4 years when it's stale. It's almost useless to many people, because what happens is that people start speaking after the fact. You cannot hold people accountable when the harm is already done. We need those information to be available in order to make decisions. You could see how important it was for the US that had one of the longest government shutdown towards the end of last year, just as a result of budget. You see how important budget can be. In Nigeria, it almost seems like we don't have repercussions for some of those decisions, and that's why it appears that there seems to be no sense of urgency when it comes to matters like that. But it is very, very important. Timeliness is one of the major characteristics of the usefulness of any data in any country. So we also need that. So they need to find a way to marry that with the fact that they also want integrity, which again, I totally agree with them. They want consistency with the data that everyone is reporting. Totally agree, but they should not put timeliness at the back burner. I think it's quite important too.
I mean, so many recommendations that you have brought forward, but I mean, finally, and to tie things together, 3 reforms that we need to see that will improve fiscal governance and reduce this budget repeal and reenactment altogether.
So if I'm going to say reforms, right, I think one of them is to improve publication timelines and accuracy of those budget documents. This is January 7th. We've not seen budget numbers, so I think that's one. Number 2 would be to enhance budget literacy programs. In a number of things, I think education generally, when it comes to the government, we've not seen a lot of that. I think this tax reform is the first in a long time that we've seen quite a number of engagement and literacy programs being done. Even still, a number of Nigerians still have quite a number of gray areas and concerns, but at least we've seen that happen. So we also need to start seeing that also when it comes to budget literacy programs. Then if you have structured stakeholder consultations and public fora where a number of independent parties with the government can come together and have conversations as to what the budget processes are, what are the stages, what are the hindrances, so that, again, people feel carried along. It helps to build social trust. I think that would also go a long way. And if I'm going to add one on that, it's probably going to have like a citizen-friendly budget reporting tools, whereas people can go to a website and then just check like a dashboard and then click on 1 or 2 things and then you get information. I think that could also help, again, help people make timely decisions. So again, those 4 things I think would help to improve the process.
Yeah, and I think all those things are necessary for accountability, especially if you're going to broaden the tax net in the year 2026. But thank you so much for your perspective on the show and your time. Samuel A. Comey, Lead Research and Insights at Noreen Berger.